Welcome to Middle East Monitors talking and conversation with our guest, Dana Nawzar. He is a UK-based he's a UK-based writer who writes on Kurdish affairs and other Middle Eastern affairs. Dana Nawzar, thank you very much for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum, thank you.
Alaikum assalam, thank you very much. So the Kurdish issue is become a point of controversy in Middle Eastern politics. So as we know, Kurds are a nation without a state, and it's one of the biggest populations in the Middle East, but without their own state. Now, can you just give us a brief overview of the Kurdish situation, spanning from Turkey, Iraq, Iran? You don't have to get too historical, but just the general current overview of what the situation now is.
Well, thanks so much for this interview and for the interest in the Kurdish issue. It would take much more than 20 minutes and 30 minutes, which I think is the time we have to talk about an overview of the Kurdish issue. It's so scattered, it's so diverse, it's so detailed, and there's a need for lots of nuances, which I think if we dedicated hours and days just to talk about the details of it, it wouldn't be enough. But I think I'll start from the point which you said, that the Kurds are the largest ethnic group in the Middle East, which don't have a state. And that in itself is a very important fact to start from. That implies two things. First of all, the way the modern Middle East is designed, it has given preference or priority to nation states. So basically, if you are a nation, you are expected to have a nation state. You are expected to have a state which is based on the ethnic boundaries, the ethnic identity of that particular nation. Now, Kurds, as you know, have been in Kurdistan, which basically means the land where the Kurds live. And it has joined many other stans like Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. So stan, this basically means a land. And Kurdistan does exist as a historical fact. You have a piece of land where Kurds live. And that piece of land is divided on 4 major countries, modern nation states: Iran, Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. Kurds have been living in this area for thousands of years. After the coming of Islam, they embraced Islam as the second group, ethnic group, after the Arabs. So basically you had Islam, which appeared in the Arabian Peninsula, and then the carriers of the message came to the other parts of the globe. And the first ethnic group which embraced Islam collectively was the Kurdish people. And the reason for that was basically because at the time of the coming of the Muslims, Kurds didn't have any sort of political autonomy. They were a part of the ancient Iran, but as an ethnic group, they were ruled by the Persians. And as you expect, at the time, there were no rules, no rights. So when the Muslims came, they embraced the new religion, which promised freedoms, which promised greater autonomy. And since then, until 1920s, Kurds became an integral part of the Muslim civilization. That setting of having not state, but as a part of a much bigger empire, a much bigger civilization, worked very well for the Kurds for about 1,400 years. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, which was also the end of an era which had lasted for about 1,400 years, 1,300 years, that was the moment when the misery for the Kurdish people as an ethnic group started. So yes, Kurds didn't have a political autonomy. They didn't have their own nation state as a part of the Muslim civilization. You didn't have an empire which was based, say, in Erbil or Sulaimani or in any other Kurdish city. But at the same time, you were not being persecuted as a Kurd. If I lived in Kurdistan at the time of, let's say, any of the Muslim empires, you were not targeted for your identity. You were not killed. You were not annihilated. You were not massacred because you were different in language, in culture. You embraced the new religion. Actually, you became a part of it. And that's why we produced so many great contributors to the Muslim civilization while having no empire of our own. The Ayyubi Emirates or the Ayyubi state, which was led by Salahuddin Layubi, one of the most famous Kurds throughout history, is a great example. So you had this Kurdish man from outskirts of Tikrit who was raised by Kurdish parents, very proud of his Kurdish identity, right? And famous for being Kurdish. So this is an undeniable fact that he was Kurdish. People knew he's Kurdish. He's from a Kurdish family. Yet he rose to the ranks of leading an entire civilization, though still pledging allegiance to the Abbasid Caliphate. This setting was about to meet a sudden catastrophic introduction with the modern nation state. Suddenly, the entire Middle East is being redesigned by colonialist powers, right? And everyone is given a nation state because you had the rise of nationalism in the Middle East and the collapse of the Ottoman power. But overnight, Kurds are waking up to a new reality, which is entirely different, from the previous reality, where your being Kurdish is actually a burden, is a crime. Like, for example, in the case of Turkey, being Kurdish became one of the most dangerous things to be in the new Turkey, because the new Turkey, which was established at the ruins of the Ottoman Empire, against the very idea and philosophy of the Ottoman Empire, which was a multinational civilizational setting, was based on the Turkish identity. So for that Turkish identity to win, it had to fight two elements. One of them was the Kurdish people, and the second was the conservatives, the Muslim conservatives. The same happened in Iraq, where people who had been running their affairs locally in an autonomous way woke up to be annexed to an Iraq which they had only known in their historical books. So, for example, where I was born in Sulaimani, my city, we actually refused to join the new Iraq. Sheikh Mahmoud Hafid, he actually led a revolution against the English, against the rich colonialists. And he was, of course, suppressed. And one of his demands was to gain back autonomy for the Wilayat Mosul and join back forces with the Turkey. Because at the time, he still thought Turkey is still the old Ottoman, and there was this idea that we can still bring back this greater embrace, right? That embrace us and let us rule ourselves. And it took many years for Sulaimani to join the new Iraq. It was actually forced to join the new Iraq. And you had a similar story everywhere that you went to. Kurds were forced to become part of a new reality, which was based entirely against them, because each nation state had to suppress you in order to build its own identity. As I have said many times on Twitter, where we actually knew each other, right? And I've said it time and again, I think this is the central message to everything I say about the modern nation state, is that it is antithetical. It is entirely against the idea of Middle East as one civilizational unit with many cultures, many ethnic groups, which has a set of values that everyone agrees on, be it Islam itself or be it other cultural paradigms where we share. But we have embraced multiculturalism as a fact for thousands of years. We have not known borders. Yet you have a new reality today where people are fighting over fake national identities. Like, I would understand if a Turk and a Kurd fought each other for their ethnic identity. I understand that. I would think it's stupid, right? I would think it's bizarre to fight over ethnic identities, but I understand it. But I don't understand two nation states fighting each other, thinking that's the limit of their identity. Iraq, for example, is an entirely fake identity. There is nothing called Iraq. It was an annexation of three different Ottoman wilayats, right? Forced to be with each other. And then the Kurds, some lady, some English lady, this is the actual story. Some English lady was passing by when the French and the British were dividing or creating Iraq basically from nothing. And he said, why not bring these lovely Sunni Kurds and join them with Baghdad, where there is a Sunni minority, so there will be a balance between the Shia and the Sunni. So you had 2 people, 3 people, 4 people coming out and mapping Middle East, creating fake borders and leading to all the chaos and bloodshed that we are facing today. Suffice to say that Kurdish story has been one of blood and misery since then. I mean, what can I tell you? Let's start from Turkey in 1920s to today, until today, where Kurds are living in misery in every single part of that region. There are relative improvements here and there, but the Kurdish story by large is one of sadness, of tragedy, of loss, of blood, of massacre, of the lack of feeling of belonging. It's a very bad feeling where you don't feel that you belong to the country that you hold its passport. That's the situation, and I hope it's not a very depressing beginning to this interview.
No, not at all. It's a reality. It's a reality of the situation, unfortunately. But currently, fast forwarding on from the creation of the nation states and from the lack of the Kurds' own states, we've seen in recent years, of course, starting from the Syrian civil war in 2011, we've seen the emergence of groups within Syria and within the region. So groups which Turkey claims are tied to the PKK, but others say are not. But we have the YPG, we have the People's Protection Units, we have the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. So we have these groups, and many claim that they could form the nucleus of a future Kurdistan. How reliable do you think that view is? Do you think it's an actual reliable view?
Who's claiming that these people are becoming the nucleus of the future Kurdistan?
Not nucleus, but these militias. We've seen other nation states throughout the Middle East, especially. So we've seen. So some people have claimed Israel's own history, not to compare Kurdistan with Israel, but we've seen their own armed forces started from militias themselves. So some analysts have claimed that, off the top of my head, I can't remember the names, but they have claimed that these militias could form the basis of, a future Kurdistan. Not sure if it's in a region or just Syria, but we've seen that they have now military standing. Whether you tie them in with the PKK or not, that's a separate view. But the fact is that they do have a military standing that has fought against Turkey, has fought against the Syrian regime forces. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, first of all, Kurdistan, as I said, is a historical piece of land. So basically having a few militias here and there, regardless of who they are and whether we call them militias, whatever, regardless of that, Kurdistan is a reality. And I have never understood the sensitivity towards this word. Because for me, Kurdistan is basically the land where Kurds live. And unless you deny reality, you deny basic facts, there is a land where Kurds live, right? And you can very fairly call that land Kurdistan. So no, there is no militia trying to establish Kurdistan. Kurdistan is there, it's a natural fact. Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself, in 2013, has a video where he talks in the Turkish parliament and he urged the Turkish parties not to be sensitive with the word Kurdistan. Because Kurdistan is a reality, it's an Ottoman reality, first and foremost. The oldest records where Kurdistan as a name is recognized is actually Ottoman. So if anyone wanted to say there is actually a Kurdistan as a political entity or as a socio geopolitic reality, there is it, and it's in the Ottoman records. So I think the starting point should be, let's not be sensitive about natural realities. Kurdistan is there. Let's not play like word games. I see some people come and say, where's Kurdistan? Where's your passport called Kurdistan? That's very childish, to be honest. So there's Kurdistan, that's different from what we talk about, the desire to have an independent state. The militias in Syria, and of course they are tied to PKK. I understand there are nuances, there are local, regional differences between PKK groups, but anyone who tries to argue that these people are different from PKK is deluding himself. PKK is an umbrella group, is an ideological group, as whatever you try to define, is a very strong centralized group. Again, there will be nuances to any such huge groups, like, for example, Muslim Brotherhood. If you try to deny that there is a group called Muslim Brotherhood around the globe, you will be denying facts, right? Now, the degree to which these different branches in these different countries are tied to each other and the historical growth of this relationship will be arguable. Two sane people can come and talk about this and argue about it, right? What's the degree of autonomy of that branch? What's the degree of any actual relationship between this branch or that branch? This is all arguable. But the relationship between PYD, YPG, PKK is a fact. Is a fact. The problem is, these guys, PKK, they are not actually the carriers of Kurdish nationalist cause right now. They are Kurds, overwhelmingly Kurds, but they do not have a Kurdish state agenda. That's not in their ideology. In the Kurdish political spectrum, these guys are not counted on the nationalist cause. They're not counted on the people who are trying to create a Kurdish state. They try to have their own entity, they try to have their own state, and they are very smartly playing games nowadays, as you can tell and you can see, right? They are being entangled in regional alliances around the area. They are much smarter players than I would say many other Kurdish players in the region, but that's for themselves. I wouldn't think that the main aim of these people is a Kurdish state. Actually, at certain points in history, they have been antagonistic towards the Kurdish state cause. Because if you think about it, if you have a Kurdish state cause, then you have to act according to the interests of that Kurdish nationalist cause, right? You would have enemies and you would have friends based on that. But if you look at it today, PKK and its regional branches in the region, whether it's PYD, YPG, the ones in Iraq or the ones in Iran, they are not acting with the Kurdish national interest or with the Kurdish state idea in mind. For them right now, the idea is to have a foothold, regardless where it is. And because of their very strong ideological, with strong leftist tendencies, they do not consider any other Kurdish entity that's not entirely tied to their own idea of what a Kurdish entity would look like. They do not consider it as a Kurdish state. If you go back to the speech of Jalal Talabani, the former president of Iraq, which he made in the Kurdish parliament, he's very clear. PKK is not ready to recognize any other Kurdish entity. And that is a very important fact in the Syrian scene as well. When PKK or when YPG, PYD, whatever you call it, when they started to gain control in the Kurdish areas during the unrest and during the messy situation in the beginning of the Syrian revolution, they were not the most popular. They were not. Actually, to this day, the Syrian population overwhelmingly is pro-ENKS or NKS, which is a more, I would say, nationalist or pro-KDP branch of the Kurds in Syria. They impose themselves as a de facto reality in the Syrian territories, in Syrian Kurdish territories. And as long as you have this strong ideological build to the PKK, to the way they operate, I don't think they would anytime soon would be carriers of Kurdish nationalist cause. Nowadays, if you look at it, they have become a part of the regional games, and they're acting as regional players. They're not tied to a certain territory anymore. They do not see Kurdistan as their only playground. They are dealing with multiple actors in the region. That's entirely opposite to the Kurdish nationalist movement from 1950s to now. PKK is a huge transformation in the way that Kurdish politics is being done. I will give you an example. When Iraqi Kurds were fighting Saddam, they had to ask for support from the Iranians. So that was the game. I fight Baghdad, I have to depend on Tehran, Damascus, and Ankara. The Iranian Kurds, like Qasimlu and the others, when they were fighting the Iranian government, they had to depend on the Iraqi government. So you had a bizarre situation where Baghdad would be killing Kurds in Iraq, but being tied to the Iranian Kurds and supporting them. And you would have another bizarre situation where the Iranian government would be fighting its own Kurdish rebel groups, at the same time, simultaneously supporting the Iraqi Kurdish groups. PKK has changed that. They think the game is no longer dependent on nation states. You have to be with PKK regardless of where they are, who they are fighting. And that's why you see today, for example, they ask Iraqi Kurds to be against Erdogan, right? Geopolitically, in today's region, Iraqi Kurds do not have a first degree of enmity with Erdogan. We don't have a problem with Turkey. And when I say we don't have a problem with Turkey, I mean the Iraqi Kurdish people in Iraqi Kurdish region, their own political interests and their rivalries is with Baghdad, not with Turkey, right? PKK is saying, no, that's changed. We are the ones who will decide who you are going to fight, who you are going to hate, right? Bashar al-Assad, for example, the guy denies the very existence of the Kurdish people. He denies it. If you ask him, and he has said it before actually, he says Kurds are coming from the Turkish mountains. The Syrian Kurds don't exist, right? And of course, there's a theme of denial among everyone who these fascist and racist leaders. They always deny your existence. And Bashar al-Assad is very clear that Syrian Kurds don't exist. Up until 2012, Syrian Kurds were not given citizenship, the very simple right of being a citizen. And yet you have PKK, which has a much friendlier position towards Bashar al-Assad. Why? Because PKK has historically been in Syria fighting Turkey, getting the support of Assad fighting Turkey. Now you imagine in the new reality, they would be fighting Damascus, right? In order to have their stronghold and to be recognized. No, they are still saying we can be allies with Assad against Erdogan. So this is a very bizarre situation where PKK is asking every single Kurd to be supporting them against Erdogan. This is not the same as the Kurdish nationalist cause, which has been historically against the central government in any given country. That means I totally deny the claim that PKK is trying to establish a Kurdish state. They are trying to establish any entity that's pro-PKK and that serves the PKK interests. Now, you may call it a Kurdish entity because the group is an overwhelmingly Kurdish group, and this is a point that many people don't understand when I argue about it. PKK's priorities are not Kurdish. And we can argue forever about what's a Kurdish priority, but I don't think PKK has Kurdish priorities. They are first and foremost an ideological group with a very totalitarian structure, with a very totalitarian mindset, and that's that.
Yeah, so you touched upon the topic of foreign relations with the Kurdish groups and you could say foreign moves towards Kurdish entities, Kurdish militias, and even the Iraqi regional autonomous region of Kurdistan. And we've seen recent Western moves towards them, diplomatic moves. So we've seen France lead delegations towards the SDF in Syria. We've seen France try to give diplomatic aid and give medical aid to Iraqi Kurdistan. We've seen US delegations to the SDF, obviously because they're allied. We've seen Russian delegations as well. So regarding this, in the past, it's never really worked out. Foreign support for the Kurds has never really worked out for the Kurds long term. They've always been betrayed. The US has turned its back on them. You said Iraq supported the KDP, Iran supported the PUK, but all of the foreign actors, they've turned their back on them once their interests have been met. So what is your opinion on the Kurds relying on foreign powers? Do you think that they can ever in the future rely on foreign powers? Or do you think that they have to be how can you say, radically inverted, radically introverted? Do you think that they should focus on themselves, or can they rely on foreign powers in the future, do you think?
That's a good question, Mohammed. Well, I mean, I would say Kurds have been between the rock and the hard place when it comes to survival in the Middle East. They have been abused by the modern nation states a lot. But they have been used by the enemies of these nation states. So in order to survive as an ethnic group, with sometimes with a political cause as well, with a demand for more autonomy, you had to depend on some kind of power. Now, most of the dependence has been regional. As I said, if you're an Iraqi Kurd fighting Baghdad, you would depend on Tehran. If you're an Iranian Kurd fighting Tehran, you would be dependent on Baghdad, and likewise. But also there has been moments where you had to depend on the foreign countries. A good example of that would be 1991, when Saddam Hussein was about to make a comeback to the Kurdish areas, the international community had to intervene and prevent an inevitable massacre. Now, if you are someone who's against international intervention at any cost and in any situation, that's up to you. But then we have seen examples of great interventions where they were needed. Bosnia being an example, Kosovo being an example, and a few other examples where foreign intervention was the only way to prevent a massacre. So there is that. You had nation states which were abusing Kurds, and in order to survive in this region, you had to, depend on them. And it has reached a level where I think it has led to a kind of mentality because of the denial, century-long denial of the Kurdish rights. The Kurdish have reached a state where anyone who says anything nice about Kurds would be welcome. When your very existence is denied, where your very language is denied, right? Anyone who says, anyone who would come to Kurdistan and say Choni Bashi, people would will love it. Oh, he talked my language. He admitted my existence. He recognized me. And it's very normal if you look at the situation where in certain countries, the very Kurdish language has been treated as a treasonous act to be talked, right? So imagine a person who's been denied for an entire century, and when he sees some love, right? It's like a child who's been abused. A child, right? Being abused and being treated very badly. Then when he grows up, he will be always looking for validation and for some love from even any stranger, right? That's the situation where we are in. Now, I'm not saying that's the best strategy to go ahead when you are in politics. That has led to a kind of a love affair. Kurdish people think in terms of love affair. Our friends, that's the term we use when someone from France or from US or from Britain or from Germany supports the Kurdish cause in any certain setting. We say that the friends of the Kurdistan. Well, we have forgotten time and again, and we have been told time and again that there is no friendship in politics. Henry Kissinger told that to Mullah Mustafa Barzani on his deathbed. There is no friendship in politics. We needed you sometime, right? We used you for a few years. That's it. Goodbye. It's not an easy question to answer, to be honest. What's the best way to interact in a region where your existence is denied? For me, if you ask me, the best way is to come up with regional mechanisms for alliance and friendship and regional mechanisms of autonomy and administration where we allow each other to coexist together in peace, right? And a democratic union based on certain values. That's my dream. That's a perfectionist dream. That's an idealist take. But what can you do in a region where your very existence is denied most of the time? Your political autonomous ambitions are dealt with as a sort of crime. I have the right to exist. I can be your big brother. I can exist. You don't. And if you ever try to do so, you are a criminal. And if you ever depend on someone else, a foreign power, you are a traitor to my country. That logic doesn't work anymore. Unless you give me what I deserve and you treat me as an equal and you treat me with respect. And at least we go back to the setting that we had about a century ago, where there was a sort of diversity. My existence, my cultural, my ethnic, my political existence was not denied. Unless we go back to that setting, I believe there will not be an end to Kurdish groups being used by the foreign powers and Kurdish people going with this love affair mindset to welcome any sort of support from these groups. I personally hate the image of the Kurdish person as a fighter. You know, I think because Donald Trump is now out of hospital, we can talk about him in a negative manner, right? I mean, I personally wouldn't talk about anyone in a negative situation if he was in a certain bad negative setting like he was a few days ago, right? A sick person. And the reason is because that's a part of our culture. We don't attack the weak, right? Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, the great Kurdish leader, he actually dealt in a very human and kind way with his enemies. When Richard Lionheart, which was his enemy, his arch enemy, and leading the Crusaders, when he fell sick, Salah ad-Din was actually very kind to him. So you can be kind to your enemy. I was not going to say this, but since he's out of hospital, Trump, in one of his press conferences, he was talking to a Kurdish reporter, and he said, "We love the Kurds. We love the Kurds. The Kurds are great fighters, right? We love them." And you may say Trump is just an anomaly. He's just a guy out there who watches lots of Fox News and media, and he doesn't represent the elite in the West. But that's a false notion. Actually, Trump recognizes and manifests and represents every single falsehood that the Western audiences think and embrace about Middle East. He's a simple guy who watches CNN and Fox News and gains his wisdom about Middle East from these channels, right? That's what the basic American thinks. They have two false notions about Kurds. The Kurdish guy as a fierce fighter, as a good fighter, right? And the Kurds as one monolithic, homogeneous entity. And Trump himself, Donald Trump, expressed those falsehoods, both falsehoods, during the fight between Turkey and PKK in Syria. First of all, he said in the press conference, "We love Kurds. They are great fighters. They fought for us. They fought Daesh." And if you look at the other side, the Kurdish people, the Kurdish leadership, they're always using this line of, "Hey, we are your supporters. We are your friends. Come rescue us. You see, we are doing all this for you, right? We fought ISIS for you. We sacrificed thousands of Kurdish Peshmerga for you. Come and support us." And that's something, as a Kurd, I don't like it. I don't like that. I'm not proud of that, to be honest. We have to reach a point where I don't have to be valued and respected for my fighting skills. You have 200 years of Orientalist culture and literature about Kurds as the fierce fighter. They are fighting everyone. They are fighters. We can use them to fight. I think we have to come out from that imagination of ourselves, from that mentality of the fighter. We don't have to fight to survive. But in order for that to be a reality, you need a Middle East where the Kurds don't need to fight to survive, where they can be just themselves, where they can actually contribute to that civilizational setting, and they contribute with great human resources, with great minds, with great fighters as well, but at least for a cause that they can own and that can be for themselves, that they shouldn't fight for their own survival. And the second falsehood is actually the monolithic nature of Kurds, right? Anytime you hear we being talked about in the Kurdish, in the international media, or anywhere else, it's like the Kurds are doing this. The Kurds are fighting the Turks. The Kurds are fighting ISIS. The Kurds, the Kurds, the Kurds, the Kurds. Now, if you talk about Turkey, you have the nuance that Turkey is a country, it has multiple nations, right? They have different parties and that. If you talk about Iran, you would have the same nuance. You expect to be a diverse country with diverse parties. When you talk about Kurds, because we don't have an entity which represents us politically, right? You are always talked about as this collective body which always acts together. Kurds buy ice cream. Kurds fight ISIS. Kurds like bread. You know, it's like there are generalizations about the entire group based on the acts of a few. And the nuance is lost there. They don't tell you the Iraqi Kurd is different from the Syrian Kurd. This kind of Kurd is different from that type of Kurd. This Kurdish person is different from that Kurdish person. And this is all nuance that you will see in the other settings. The only way forward for these falsehoods about Kurdish people to be gotten rid of, for this narrative, for these false narratives to be gotten rid of, is to redesign Middle East based on the facts of a century ago. And you know what's the disappointing part about it? What's a reality in Europe today, EU, that structure which brings fighting nations that fought each other, that killed each other for years, and they committed massacres against each other, which is a reality now, the European Union. which is a reality. We had the same reality before them, about a century ago. So what I'm asking for, what looks like a dream, what looks like an idealist notion about bringing back that structure where we can actually live together as autonomous administrative units based on our cultural boundaries, respecting each other's differences, backgrounds, while working together based on mutual respect, mutual interest, and shared values. It was a reality just a century ago. I'm not coming up with a crazy idea of, hey, let's create something that's never been seen before. I'm just asking for something that we had actually. So anytime you ask me about these things, my solution is this. We have to go back to that reality. I'm not going back to a certain model. We have to recreate a certain model which allows us to live together.
Yeah, well, you just answered my next question, actually, which was going to be about your potential, the potential route that Kurds can take, and indeed the region can take, and your idea about a unified region with various blocks uniting, like the EU. I've heard that concept before, but a lot of people see it, like you said, as unrealistic, as idealistic. But in my opinion, in my personal opinion, one of the main things that is holding that back is a leaning towards dictatorship of the governments in the region, of the governments in the Middle East. So you also mentioned about the kind of myths that Westerners, mainly Westerners, but people in the international community have about the Kurds. So you mentioned about the monolithic view that they have. You know, all Kurds are the same. There's no just Syrian Kurds. Syrian Kurdish is different from Iraqi Kurdish. That doesn't exist to them. It's all monolithic. But the Western view is also one that has pervaded the media in recent years. So the Kurds are, like you said, fighters who also have women fighters. They fight for women's rights and they fight for democracy. And Kurds, like Israel again, sorry for comparing them, Kurds are the only democratic force in that region, where the Arab states are non-democratic, etc. What do you think about this opinion? You touched upon it a bit. Yeah, but is it completely false? Like about like the democratic women's rights aspect of it? What would be your answer to those people?
Well, I mean, the short answer is this: it's nonsense. That's the short answer. The long answer is this one. Kurdi here, who's entirely biased to my people, of course, and to my community, and based on the idea of al-aqrabuna awla bil ma'ruf. You are best, you treat the best, the closest to you. They are my people, so I'm of course biased to them. I think we as Kurds should shun this notion of trying to sell ourselves as somehow more progressive than the rest of the Middle East, and that's why we deserve some mercy, right? This idea that, hey, support us, these great, cute, secular Kurds, against the entire barbaric, Islamist, genocidal, whatever Middle East. I think it's a rubbish notion. Nobody is buying that, of course, among the educated people who knows one thing or two about Middle East. They know that's rubbish. They know that has no base in reality. But again, the Western media, or whatever that is that's producing these images about Middle East, starting from the Orientalist culture 200 years ago until now, well, doesn't like lots of nuances. They don't like nuances. They like to give you a simple generalization, a simple story, a simple narrative to tell. And I've always said that narratives are more dangerous than facts. You know, we have had lots of fights in Middle East. Actually, other people have had much bloodier fights than us in Middle East. If you look at it, despite all the misery that's happened in Middle East, we still haven't reached the moment where we actually kill each other as ethnic groups. You know, we haven't started going out and killing each other's babies based on who they are because of being a Turk or Kurd or Arab or whatever. And if it's happened, it hasn't been a collective decision by the nation. It has been an authoritarian, an autocrat using its power to silence everyone and starting from the most different, which has been the ethnic group. So the idea that we deserve respect and we deserve support because we are somehow more progressive is so bad that is disrespectful to the hundreds of thousands of people who are more conservative than anyone you would know, and they have been Kurds and they have been killed simply for being a Kurd. I come from Halabja, that's where my household comes from. It's the most conservative Kurdish city in Iraq. And as you know, it's the city which was bombarded by the Iraqi regime in 1988 during the Iranian-Iraqi war, and 5,000 people died. If I had to give you an estimate, maybe 99% of these 5,000 were practicing Muslims, conservative Muslims. The buildings that were destroyed, they didn't have a church in them, they had mosques in them. So this idea that we deserve respect, we deserve support, because we are more progressive than others, is disrespectful to the very Kurdish people themselves. And we should shun these ideas, because they are a preface for genocide. And that's one of the warnings I've made several times to people using this language, because that would be a very dangerous notion. Look at this. Do you know that many leftists in the West support Bashar al-Assad because somehow they consider this brutal dictator, this animal, as a progressive icon? Why? Because he has been supporting the Christian minority in Syria. Now, I'm not going into the details of whether he's actually a custodian and a protector and a gate to protect the Christians in Syria or not. I don't touch that. We don't have time for that. But let's assume he is, right? Let's assume he's the guy that's been propagated as the secular, cute protector of Christians minority, and he's fighting these dangerous, long-bearded Islamists like Daesh and Nusra and the others, so he has to be supported. Let's assume that's a fact. Do you know how dangerous it is when tomorrow he will be fighting Kurds in Syria? Because this is the guy that's been sold right now to the entire globe based on that. He's been now rehabilitated into the international scene based on these false notions about Bashar al-Assad. The idea of the dictator who's brutal, who's killing, but who's also cute and secular and loving, who allows short skirts, is at the heart of Western policy making towards Middle East, and actually the international community's policy making towards Middle East. Because now Russia has also jumped on that bandwagon of our Christian, I don't know, you know, our lovely Christian partners or whatever in Middle East. So we have to entirely get rid of this discourse, which ties someone's value to the ideological view that he upholds. We have to get rid of that. And I've called this, of course, the silence for scared equation. You know, we will be silent on the atrocities that you commit because you allow short skirts, right? That's the same policy that's been happening in Saudi right now. You have a brutal guy who's killing like a young a teenager, who's killing everyone he comes across and who doesn't like, who's putting in prison anyone that he doesn't like. The guy has in prison from the far right to the far left, from the most Islamist to the most secular, because they don't like him or because they are independent enough to have their own opinion. But he's been rehabilitated into the international scene. You will have a global summit in Saudi soon. Why? Because the guy is progressive. He's allowing women to drive. He will have a beach in Saudi where you can go with a mayo, and that's great. You know what's the dangerous about this? And I've said this time and again. The international community's animosity towards Turkey today is not against Turkey, the state. It's against Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And many people don't get this, including people in Erdogan's circle himself. They think, no, this is a fight against the great Shanlı Turkey. They try to take over us. That's rubbish. Nobody is against Turkey, the state. Nobody is against Turkey, the state, which is confined to its own territory and is oppressing the Kurds and is happy with having just some beaches in Antalya to be a Kaaba for the tourists from around the world. Nobody's against that Turkey. They are against the Turkey, which has a say in the international affairs, which has a say in the regional affairs, which actually dares to say Jerusalem is ours, which actually dares to send arms to Libya, which actually is a regional force who has an idea, who has an ideology, who has an agenda. They are against that Turkey. And Macron said it best. He said, we don't have a problem with Turkey, we have a problem with Erdogan. Now, I have said these experts, right, who talk about Turkey and they say, no, that's a false notion about Turkey. Anyone who would come after Erdogan will have the same strategy. That's rubbish. That's not true. Anyone who comes after Erdogan will not act like Erdogan. Anyone who comes after Erdogan will be accepted by the international community because anyone who will come after Erdogan will come despite of Erdogan, not because of Erdogan. And they say, no, there are red lines which nobody will pass and everyone in Turkey has a consensus on. That's another misunderstanding of Turkey. I think the scene in Turkey has changed so much that the next guy who will come will have to concede a lot to the international community. He will have to concede in the Middle East. He will have to restore the alliance with Israel, has to restore the alliance with Assad, has to restore the alliance with the Arab countries in the Gulf. Because if you remember, before Erdogan, that was the Turkey we were talking about. It was a huge, great bloc sitting right there, a sleeping giant, which was in alliance with every single dictator in the region. And when the next guy after Erdogan comes, he will be restoring this status quo that has faced some instability because of Erdogan's time in power. And that's why I'm saying that. I'm not giving an analysis on Turkey now. I'm saying this because the next guy who will come in Turkey, he will be given a blank slate to do whatever he wants to Kurds. And many stupid Kurdish leftists don't get this. They have made the cause against Erdogan, and that's why they are propagating this false notion of we the progressive against Erdogan, the Islamist. Because if you look at it, the Turkish left is actually more progressive than Kurds will ever be. Socially, the Turkish left is the most progressive left, liberally speaking. They are socially the most liberal grouping in the Middle East, socially. They have no problem. They are not Islamists like Erdogan. They are drinking raki every day, right? They have short skirts and they have beads. They have all the checks that you need to see if they are the good guys or the bad guys, according to Western media. So imagine if tomorrow, let's say, Ekrem İmamoğlu is at the head of Turkey. Today's the current mayor of Istanbul. The guy will be given a blank slate to annihilate you in Turkey. Because at the time, unless you surrender, unless you say my cause was against Erdogan, and since today there is someone else against instead of Erdogan, let's be friends with them and let's prostitute ourselves to him, unless you say that. And that's possible because, as I said, today the cause raised by these guys is not a Kurdish cause. It's not a nationalist cause. It's an ideological one. Unless you do this. But that's not very feasible because you have an autonomy, you have support here and there. You have to be continuing the struggle against Turkey, right? But how would you continue the struggle at the time? When you have a progressive force leading Turkey, you would not have that sympathy that you have right now from the Western powers. And you know what's the best proof for that? Have you ever heard Israel say anything in support of Kurdish people in Turkey in the 1990s? Not in the 1990s, up until a few years ago when Erdogan started to have a U-turn in terms of his ways of dealing with Israel. Because let's remember, Erdogan, when he came to power in the first years, he had to tactically, right, smartly, I would say, deal with Israel as a status quo, as a reality in the region. He actually visited Israel, and that was one of the most fierce critics in the conservative environment in Turkey, was that you are not allowed to have good ties with Israel. He kept those good ties until he needed it, and I think he's now having a U-turn for whatever reason he has. But today you have Israel supporting Kurdish autonomy and Kurdish, and they are reminding Erdogan and Turkey of the way they act towards the Kurdish groups every single day. Now we have a great ally in Israel, is it? But we didn't hear them before. Why? Because before Erdogan, you had a great country like Turkey, a great NATO ally, a great ally to Israel, and at the same time being led by people who don't give a damn about Jerusalem, about Qudus, about Palestine. When Erdogan is gone, and when I say when Erdogan is gone, I mean when Erdogan is gone. I don't mean when AK Party is gone. I don't think he has an alternative right now in his own party. There is no one who will be like him in his own party as well. When he is gone, you will go back to the status quo where everyone will prefer a strong, huge Turkey to a bunch of militias who are selling themselves as great, progressive, leftist, whatever movements. So I'm absolutely against the notion of support to Kurds is needed because they are great people who have a battalion with an LGBTQ flag. I think that's rubbish, and we should get rid of it as soon as possible.
Well, thank you very much. It's time to wrap up now, but obviously within these 45 minutes, it's not enough to cover the whole Kurdish issue. The whole Kurdish issue is so huge and so deep that it's not enough time. But it was a good it was a good overview. It was a good insight into the current Kurdish situation. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.